Excellencies, distinguished ministers, ladies and gentlemen, I am very pleased to welcome you to this timely and urgent high-level meeting on Sudan. I thank all heads of state and government for their presence. I offer a particularly strong welcome to the Sudanese delegations represented by Vice President Ali Osman Taha and First Vice President Salva Kiir Mayardit, and also special and warm welcome with gratitude to President Obama of the United States and Mr. Zhang Ping, Chairperson of the African Union Commission. I also welcome Your Highnesses and Your Excellencies who have made such a special effort to be present for this meeting. Let me make a brief personal, a few introductory remarks. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, we are here because Sudan's leaders and people face critical, difficult questions about their future. The stakes are high for Sudan, for Africa, for the international community. The Sudanese people cannot afford a resumption of conflict. We must all assist them in finding a peaceful way through one of the most important passages in their country's history. Ladies and gentlemen, this meeting is an opportunity for the representatives of Sudan, the friends of Sudan, the country's neighbors, and those states and organizations that have worked so hard for Sudan's future, to gather at a critical juncture to assess where we stand and to recommit ourselves to the comprehensive peace agreement and the hard road ahead. The issues facing Sudan cannot be addressed in isolation. They must be considered together as part of an overall vision for Sudan, with a focus on the rights and aspirations of all Sudan's citizens. The parties have implemented many of the key CPA provisions without a return to serious conflict. This is a significant achievement. Not so long ago, Sudan was still mired in one of the deadliest conflicts since World War II. 5 years down the CPA path, that has changed. But the most important challenges are now less than 4 months away. The referenda on the self-determination of the Southern Sudan and on the status of Abyei. The international community has clear expectations for this process. We expect the referenda to be peaceful, carried out in an environment free of intimidation or other infringement of rights. We expect both parties to accept the results and to plan for the consequences. And finally, we expect the parties to adhere to the CPA without unilateral acts on either side, north or south. Both CPA parties have done a lot to prepare for the referendum, but time is short and there is much to do as the deadline nears. The UN mission in Sudan has trained more than 9,000 Southern Sudanese police. UN staff will be positioned in every country, every county in Southern Sudan during the polling. I have also established a panel to facilitate a credible, transparent process. President Mkapa, the former president of Tanzania, the chair of the panel, is with us today. I thank you very much. Whatever the outcome, North and South must coexist peacefully. Sudanese, North and South, must negotiate agreements that reflect the reality of a shared history and shared resources, agreements on border management, citizenship, migration, security, debts, and assets. These issues do not all need to be resolved ahead of the referendum, but it is crucial that a mutually beneficial framework for managing North-South relations is put in place quickly. Let us also be clear with respect to the Abuey referendum. The Abuey Commission must be formed, and it must be formed immediately. In addition, the Sudanese must ensure that the popular consultations in Blue Nile and Southern Kordofan states are inclusive, timely, and credible. I welcome work of the African Union High-Level Implementation Panel led by President Mbeki, which has worked closely with the UN mission in Sudan to provide a forum for resolving these issues. I urge all here to assist the government of Southern Sudan in its efforts to build up its capacity to provide the basic services, protect people, and strengthen governance and the rule of law. And these capacities are required no matter what the outcome of the referendum. In Darfur, it is essential to continue working towards a comprehensive solution and based on the principles of a ceasefire and security arrangements, greater authority for Darfur, fair representation of Darfurians at all levels of government, compensation, reconciliation, and economic development for the region. These principles, together with justice and the rule of law, provide the basis for sustainable peace. I commend the government of Sudan, the Liberation and Justice Movement, and civil society, with the support of the Joint Chief Mediator and government of Qatar, for their engagement, and I call on all armed movements to join the process. Peace must be both comprehensive and inclusive. Those who truly want it must join the give and take at the negotiating table. That is where peace is made, not on the sidelines. The people of Darfur have suffered too long. The security situation in Darfur remains a grave concern, particularly as it affects civilians and internally displaced persons. I am also deeply troubled by attacks against UN peacekeepers and the continued loss of life among their ranks. I call on all parties to cease hostilities and allow the African Union UN hybrid operation in Darfur and all UN-associated personnel unimpeded access. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to renew our common commitment to peace in Sudan, where coexistence is valued, where war-affected populations can return to their homes, where the rule of law prevails, and where all people can share in the country's political, economic, and cultural riches. The United Nations will continue to do its part in assisting all Sudanese in fulfilling their long-held hopes for a better future. Thank you very much. What I'm going to do is I will firstly give floor to African Union Chairman, Mr. Zhang Ping. Then I'd like to invite the President Barack Obama of the United States. Then I'll try to invite two representatives from Sudan. That is going to be the opening segment of this meeting. Then I will give a floor to the first, starting from the heads of state from Africa. And this will be, because we have so many heads of state, we'll try to do it according to alphabetical order. I hope you will understand. First, Mr. Zhang Ping, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellencies, heads of state and government and of delegations, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to begin by thanking the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon for convening this important meeting. This further heightens the attention that the international community brings to the situation in Sudan at a pivotal moment in the history of this nation. This provides an opportunity to agree upon practical measures that need to be taken in the upcoming months to allow the Sudanese people to successfully meet the challenges that they face. I welcome amongst us the presence of important representatives of heads of African states and governments, including the President of the African Union, Mr. Wamutarika, as well as the presence of the first and second vice presidents of Sudan. Of course, I welcome the presence of other heads of state, and I welcome the personal participation of President Barack Obama, whose interest in Africa is auspicious and full of promise. I commend you, President. In January 2011, the population of southern Sudan will take a momentous decision on whether to remain within a united Sudan or to secede, to establish an independent state. Other regions of Sudan, Abyei, South Kordofan and Blue Nile, and we hope too Darfur, will also take crucial decisions which will affect the future of the entire country. The Sudanese decisions and the manner in which they are carried out will also reverberate across all of Africa. Sudan is a crossroads, a meeting place for East, West, and North Africa, between Muslims and Christians, among the Arab and non-Arab peoples. If the final months of implementing the provisions of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement are undertaken in a peaceful, orderly, and credible manner, Sudan will serve as an inspiration and will provide additional proof of Africa's capacity to find effective answers to the problems that it faces. The presence of the African Union at this meeting is a token of our confidence in the capacity of the Sudanese leaders, in particular President Omar Hassan al-Bashir and the First Vice President Salva Kiir Mayardit, to exercise the leadership, the vision, and the pragmatism that are necessary to successfully steer Sudan through the most challenging months of its history as an independent nation. At this historical crossroads, Africa continues to stand in solidarity with Sudan. One tangible expression of the solidarity is the presence of tens of thousands of African peacekeepers who serve in Sudan in the international missions UNMISS and UNAMID, as well as the daily actions of the high-level implementation panel established by President Thabo Mbeki, a further example of our commitment to achieving a conclusion of the processes underway in Sudan. The date of the referendum on self-determination for southern Sudan is just 107 days away, and it is vitally important that the vote in this region is conducted in a manner that is fully credible and legitimate. It is true the Sudanese parties have made remarkable progress in preparation for the referendum, but we must acknowledge that the road that lies ahead is still long, and time is not on our side. Many other important challenges need to be met during these future months, including the border demarcation between the north and the south, the resolution of the question of Abyei, the organization of the popular consultation in South Kordofan and in the Blue Nile, as well as the conclusion of the negotiations on the post-referendum arrangements. On all of these issues, the African Union is working with the United Nations in order to meet our common goals. In Khartoum and in Juba, Coordination between the African Union Implementation Panel and UNMISS is promising, based on a regular exchange of information and analyses, on coordinated interaction with the Sudanese parties, and, more comprehensively, the harnessing of our comparative advantages in order to facilitate the implementation of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement and as harmonious and seamless as possible a transition during the post-referendum period. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, nowhere is our common interest more apparent than in Darfur. 7 years after the outbreak of conflict in this region, we are still seeking a peaceful and negotiated settlement. Nowhere is the need for a joint African Union, United Nations strategy and a coordinated approach more vital and more imperative. The most visible manifestation of our common commitment to putting an end to the unspeakable suffering of the people of Darfur is the hybrid African Union United Nations operation UNAMID. This is a unique exercise, a unique mission, innovative in the partnership between our two organizations. The deployment of UNAMID, which is currently the largest peacekeeping operation in the world today, with a clear mandate of ensuring the protection of the civilian population, is an eloquent token of what can be achieved when our two organizations work together hand in glove. In our awareness of the need of a comprehensive and holistic approach to meet the challenges posed to peace, justice, and reconciliation in Darfur, the African Union, as you know, created in March 2009 a high-level group on Darfur. The report, following its adoption in Abuja in October 2009, provides the reference framework for the African Union concerning the future path for Darfur. In December 2009, this report and the decision adopted by the African Union Peace and Security Council were conveyed to the United Nations Security Council, which urged all the stakeholders to cooperate with the African Union in the implementation and follow-up of the recommendations that were established. We must affirm that the situation in Darfur has not improved significantly. Last week was marred by combats and conflicts between Arab tribes, which led to hundreds of losses of lives, as well as by the serious incidents that have occurred within the camps of displaced persons. Millions of persons are still displaced, afraid of or unable to return home. Grounds for further concern is the lack of significant progress made in the conclusion of a comprehensive political agreement for Darfur. We commend the state of Qatar for its commitment and for its perseverance, as reflected in the negotiations between Doha and the government of Sudan and the rebel factions of Darfur, and we have lent our tireless support to the efforts of the mediator, the joint chief mediator, Jibril Basouleh. However, we must note that these efforts have not yet culminated in success. The positions of the parties still remain far apart, and the inclusive negotiating process has not yet begun. We must recognize that all efforts taken to date aimed at a partial solution involving only those with guns have failed. The people of Darfur have made their views perfectly clear. They want to be represented in a process that is inclusive and that will result in a global political agreement. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate my thanks to Secretary General Ban Ki-moon for organizing this important meeting. The African Union conveys its gratitude also to the eminent international leaders present here today, and their presence testifies to the great importance that we all attach to Sudan. The primary responsibility for the future of Sudan lies with the Sudanese people and their leaders to find adequate answers to the crisis within their country. And as a result, I turn to the Sudanese people and implore them to rise to the challenge that they face. That is the challenge of forging their nation anew, whether as one state or two. The responsibility for success or failure is theirs. For its part, the international community must continue to lend its sincere and necessary support while recalling that it can in no way replace the Sudanese. Thank you.
I thank the Chairperson Ping for his statement. I now have a great pleasure to invite His Excellency President Barack Obama of the United States of America. You have the floor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary General. On behalf of us all, thank you for convening this meeting to address the urgent situation in Sudan that demands the attention of the world. At this moment, the fate of millions of people hangs in the balance. What happens in Sudan in the days ahead may decide whether a people who have endured too much war move towards peace or slip backwards into bloodshed. And what happens in Sudan matters to all of sub-Saharan Africa, and it matters to the world. I want to thank Vice President Taha and First Vice President Kiir for being here. To my fellow leaders from Africa, the Middle East, Europe, and Asia, your presence sends an unmistakable message to the Sudanese people and to their leaders that we stand united. The comprehensive peace agreement that ended the civil war must be fully implemented. The referendum on self-determination, scheduled for January 9th, must take place peacefully and on time. And the will of the people of South Sudan and the region of Abyei must be respected, regardless of the outcome. We are here because the leaders of Sudan face a choice. It's not the choice of how to move forward to give the people of Sudan the peace they deserve. We already know what needs to be done. The choice is for Sudanese leaders is whether they will have the courage to walk the path. And the decision cannot be delayed any longer. Despite some recent progress, preparations for the referenda are still behind schedule. Now the vote is only a little more than 100 days away. And tragically, as has already been referred to, a recent spike in violence in Darfur has cost the lives of hundreds of more people. So the stakes are enormous. We all know the terrible price paid by the Sudanese people the last time North and South were engulfed in war. Some 2 million people killed. 2 million people. Millions more left homeless. Millions displaced to refugee camps, threatening to destabilize the entire region. Separately, in Darfur, the deaths of hundreds of thousands shocked the conscience of the world. This is the awful legacy of conflict in Sudan, the past that must not become Sudan's future. And that is why, since I took office, my administration has worked for peace in Sudan. In my meetings with world leaders, I've urged my counterparts to fully support and contribute to the international effort that is required. Ambassador Susan Rice has worked tirelessly to build a strong and active coalition committed to moving forward. My special envoy, General Gratian, has worked directly with the parties in his 20 visits to the region. We've seen some progress. With our partners, we've helped to bring an end to the conflict between Sudan and Chad. We've worked urgently to improve humanitarian conditions on the ground. And we're leading the effort to transform the Sudan People's Liberation Army into a professional security force, including putting an end to the use of children as soldiers. Recognizing that Southern Sudan must continue to develop and improve the lives of its people, regardless of the referendum's outcome, we in the UN mission are helping the government of Southern Sudan improve the delivery of food and water and health care and strengthen agriculture. And most recently, we've redoubled our efforts to ensure that the referenda takes place as planned. Vice President Biden recently visited the region to underscore that the results of the referenda must be respected. Secretary Clinton has engaged repeatedly with Sudanese leaders to convey our clear expectations. We've increased our diplomatic presence in Southern Sudan and mobilized others to do the same to prepare for the January 9th vote and for what comes after. But no one can impose progress and peace on another nation. Ultimately, only Sudanese leaders can ensure that the referenda go forward and that Sudan finds peace. There's a great deal of work that must be done, and it must be done quickly. So, two paths lay ahead. One path taken by those who flout their responsibilities and for whom there must be consequences, more pressure and deeper isolation. The other path is taken by leaders who fulfill their obligations and which would lead to improved relations between the United States and Sudan, including supporting agricultural development for all Sudanese, expanding trade and investment, and exchanging ambassadors, and eventually working to lift sanctions if Sudanese leaders fulfill their obligations. Now is the time for the international community to support Sudanese leaders who make the right choice. Just as the African nations of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development rose to the challenge and helped the parties find a path to peace in 2005, all of us can do our part to ensure that the comprehensive peace agreement is fully implemented. We must promote dignity and human rights throughout all of Sudan, and this includes extending the mandate of the UN Independent Expert of Sudan, because we cannot turn a blind eye to the violations of basic human rights. And as I said, regardless of the outcome of the referendum, we must support development in Southern Sudan because people there deserve the same dignity and opportunities as anyone else. And even as we focus on advancing peace between North and South, we will not abandon the people of Darfur. The government of Sudan has recently pledged to improve security and living conditions in Darfur, and it must do so. It need not wait for a final peace agreement. It must act now to halt the violence and create the conditions, access and security, so aid workers and peacekeepers can reach those in need and so development can proceed. Infrastructure and public services need to be improved, and those who target the innocent, be they civilians, aid workers, or peacekeepers, must be held accountable. Progress towards a negotiated and definitive end to the conflict is possible, and now is the moment for all nations to send a strong signal that there will be no time and no tolerance for spoilers who refuse to engage in peace talks. Indeed, there can be no lasting peace in Darfur, and no normalization of relations between Sudan and the United States without accountability for crimes that have been committed. Accountability is essential not only for Sudan's future, it also sends a powerful message about the responsibilities of all nations, that certain behavior is simply not acceptable in this world, that genocide is not acceptable. In the 21st century, rules and universal values must be upheld. I saw the imperative of justice when I visited one of the camps in Chad several years ago. It was crowded with more than 15,000 people, most of them children. What I saw in that camp was heartbreaking. Families who had lost everything, surviving on aid. I'll never forget the man who came up to me, a former teacher who was raising his family of 9 in that camp. He looked at me and he said very simply, "We need peace. We need peace." Your Excellencies, Vice President Taha, First Vice President Kiir, the Sudanese people need peace. And all of us have come together today because the world needs a just and lasting peace in Sudan. Here, even as we confront the challenges before us, we can look beyond the horizon to the different future that peace makes possible. And I want to speak directly to the people of Sudan, North and South. In your lives, you have faced extraordinary hardship, but now there's the chance to reap the rewards of peace. And we know what that future looks like. It's a future where children, instead of spending the day fetching water, can go to school and come home safe. It's a future where families back in their homes can once again farm the soil of their ancestors. It's a future where, because their country has been welcomed back into the community of nations, more Sudanese have the opportunity to travel, more opportunity to provide education, more opportunities for trade. It's a future where, because their economy is tied to the global economy, a woman can start a small business, a manufacturer can export his goods. A growing economy raises living standards from large cities to the most remote village. This is not wide-eyed imagination. This is the lesson of history. From Northern Ireland to the Balkans, from Camp David to Aceh, that with leaders of courage and vision, compromise is possible and conflicts can be ended. And it is the example of Africans, from Liberia to Mozambique to Sierra Leone, that after the darkness of war, there can be a new day of peace and progress. So that is the future that beckons the Sudanese people, North and South, East and West. That is the path that is open to you today. And for those willing to take that step, to make that walk, know that you will have a steady partner in the United States of America. Thank you very much.